why are we here? Why are we here today talking to you about this particular issue? And there are several points here. The first one is everybody can see and everybody knows that there's a lot of pressure in the outdoor industry, and in fact in every industry, to market your products as green. There's consumer concern, citizen concern, and it's being reflected in what people think they should be putting across. And green claims are really important to get right because they're different from the claims that businesses usually make. Businesses, if my business comes and it says to you through my marketing, this is the best performing product out there, and you go and buy it, and then you find really when you use it that it's not that good after all. Well, you've lost a bit of money. Okay, next time you take money and you spend it with a different business. And in that situation, there's very little harm done. But if I make a green claim about my product, and I'm telling you lots of things about the greenness, the environmental, the safety for the environment, and actually your product is not is doing damage to you personally, your health, or could potentially do damage to personally your health, or is doing damage to the environment, then the consequences of that misinterpretation of what we're saying is much more serious, and it's potentially permanent. However, scrutiny of green claims is not as in-depth often in the media and online as the scrutiny of the product performance or the product quality. You go online, you'll find endless reviews of, oh, this product versus that product, which one's better, and this, that, and the other. But still, it's relatively rare for in-depth journalistic scrutiny and public scrutiny of the things that people are putting out. We're here today to make the case for more in-depth scrutiny, and what we're going to try and do going forwards, and what this new website is part of, is providing detailed information about what we're doing. We're defining our claims so that the public can come and look at them in detail, and they should be verifiable, relevant, and justified publicly. It's much more important to get these things right than it is with other kinds of marketing. So today we're going to look specifically, because there are a lot of green issues, but we're going to look specifically at consumer chemical safety. It's particularly important for a company like ours, because we're putting chemicals into people's homes. You know, they're buying our product, they're taking it home. We have very little control over how they use that. It's not a controlled environment. People will get it out in their kitchen, spray it, and it will go on the kids and on the dog. So we have to be very careful about what we put into people's homes. So what do consumers, and it is about the consumers, what do consumers want to know about chemical products? They want to know, obviously, is it safe? But they also want to know that they can trust what you're saying about whether it's safe or not. If we look at a bit more detail at those two questions, safety in itself is a term that needs defining. What do you mean by safe? Yeah? And it breaks down into generally 4 areas, or this is an assessment of safety should touch these 4 areas. And it's about short-term and long-term effects. Is it safe for me personally now? Is it going to blind me? Is it going to burn me? Is it going to irritate my skin? And that's about an immediate effect. Generally, at least in Europe, consumer legislation is quite good at making sure that things are labelled if they're going to be harmful, irritant, flammable, whatever. Is it safe for me in the long term? This is a bit more difficult because this is about cancer. This is about potentially infertility. This is about long-term effects that you're not going to notice immediately, but as these products are around in the environment, then they can have a long-term effect. They can increase chances of your likelihood of all kinds of things. That's more difficult to legislate against, actually, because the need for evidence is the evidence takes a lot longer to gather. And the same applies short-term and longer-term for the environment. Is it going to kill the fish in the river? Am I putting some sort of solvent down the drain which is going to be damaging? And in the long term, is this going to bioaccumulate in the environment? Is it going to cause climate change? Is it going to have a longer term effect, which is more difficult to pin down now, but it's a long term effect. So how can consumers trust what you say? Not everybody's an expert, but how can they trust what you say? This is a key point. Your claims, really, ideally, we believe, need to be verifiable, and they need to be testable. And often that's about defining what you mean. So if we go back to safety, you know, what do you mean by safe? This is my interpretation of safe. Your interpretation of safe might be something different. So let's at least know that you know how I'm defining my claim. And can your business publicly explain the relevance of the claim? Because one thing is a claim being true, and another thing is a claim being relevant. And both of these things can be addressed by providing as much information as you can to the consumer, and also, as we'll see going forwards, some third-party wisdom helps as well. So let's look at a few labels. How do these labels address the consumer's questions, which are about safety and about credibility? Okay, which of these labels are testable and verifiable? What do they mean? So we've got a specific one. These are made-up ones, apart from that one, which is one of ours. That's quite specific. You could test for that. And an independent person, or a journalist, or a consumer, at the end of the day, could commission a test to do that. But there are others, like Member of the Fairy Alliance. Okay, that's a joke. But what that's really saying is that there's a third party, yeah? And what do you actually know about that? What can the consumer find out about that third party? And the details of what they're actually saying. What does that represent? So you've got different types of claims about chemical safety. Remember, we're talking about chemical safety. There are other issues, green issues, that we'd like to talk about. But there are claims which are made directly by us, the company, and we are saying to consumers, right, our product is fluorocarbon free. That is one of ours, but it could be all kinds of things. But if it's made directly by the consumer, so our product is all natural ingredients. There's another, natural is another term that needs definition, right? Or there are claims which are made by deferring to a third party. So you want to know about our chemical safety? Well, don't ask us. You know, don't ask this party. We've got this seal of approval from these guys. And in both cases, it's equally important to scrutinise what the claim actually is in detail. I think this is the thing, people often stop when it comes to the third party thing. They say, oh right, it's got this label, right, it must be. Okay, I'll stop worrying about it now. But in both cases it's important for somebody, whether it's the press or it's the consumers or it's other groups that are representing consumers, Greenpeace for example, yeah? It's important that everybody can get to the bottom of what you mean. So claims made directly by the company, how are they verifiable? How can you test it? And there are some examples of questions here that you might want to ask, or a consumer might want to ask. Is the claim defined in such terms that it can be tested? If you're saying environmentally friendly, yeah, what does that mean? And again, the business's definition of what environmentally friendly is and the consumer's definition of what environmentally friendly is, they might not be the same. So it's not right to assume that if the business is making a claim about themselves, that you mean the same thing. Could you commission a test to independently confirm the green claim? What can the consumer actually do, or people representing the consumer do to check that, double check that that is really true, that what you're saying is up to scratch? And what helps sometimes in that is that you get your claim to be independently audited in some way. And this question of independence, again, is one that we're going to look at in a minute. Is it relevant? You know, if we're thinking about chemical safety, does the claim relate to chemical safety, or is it about something else? Is it about some other aspect of green? Or maybe it's not about green at all, but it sounds green. Is the relevance of the claim justified by the company? Is the company putting out some sort of public explanation of why this particular issue is important? And can you find out information about it not from the company as well, obviously? Is the claim and its verification published on company websites? Kind of the same point, really. So let's look now at Nikwax product and some of the claims that we've made in the past about our products, and we'll go to the next slide. And you know, the first thing to say is that we're not doing it perfectly. And we're now going through a process where we're trying to apply stricter conditions to how we talk about these things. So we want verifiable, we want independent verification, hopefully it helps, and we need to justify the relevance of the claim. And here we've got our labels. At the moment we've got these green stickers on, right? 0 fluorocarbon. Okay, that's one of the claims that's on there. Is it defined in verifiable terms? Well, as long as you understand that we should actually define more strictly what we mean by fluorocarbon. We really mean PFCs. So there's a problem with the definition perhaps, but as long as you understand that we're talking about a particular group of chemicals and we're talking about 0, which again is within detectable limits, but we explain that, then it's quite testable. You can do a test to work out, I don't know how much it would cost, but journalist and newspaper, that might be justified to do that.
Well, for a simple fluorine test, it's £70, 100 euros.
Well, that's a tricky question, because you can test for fluorine but quite cheaply, and we can say that you could test our products and there's going to be no sources of fluorine. The only sources of fluorine would be if we were using fluorocarbon chemicals. Anyway, let's move on. So that's quite a strong one from us, we think. Water-based, is it defined in verifiable terms? Well, it really could be better. What does water-based mean? What's the test for water-based? What we mean is that water is the major solvent that we use, the major means of application. It means solvent for it, basically. But, you know, we haven't had that verified independently, so that's a bit weak, and we haven't justified it that well. We haven't explained really what we mean that well. So that's a slightly weaker one. We want to improve on that. And if we look at this last one, eco-leader, okay, that really is not something that we can say about ourselves, you know. Maybe if we defined what we meant by an eco-leader, then perhaps we could say that about ourselves. We have had some awards from papers in the UK who try and look at things, but really, unless we explain what we're going to do, we've really got to stop saying that. It's actually up to the public and to the journalists to weigh up what we do, provided we give them all the information, and then they can decide, or you lot can decide, who's an eco-leader and who's not. And we've got another example here. This is someone else's product, but we've changed the colours and everything, you can't tell who it is. But here is a product where there's deferral to a third party. Okay? You've got this product here, and it's clearly labelled under EU legislation that it's flammable and it's irritant to the skin. And yet it's got some sort of third party approval, green gods. Okay? That's not a joke. So immediately my question is, well, what is this green god standard, and you know, how come that this can be an irritant product and a flammable product and still be approved? You know, does this standard mean the same as what I mean by safety? Yeah. What's the detail of this? And that's important, right? So claims made by deferral to a third party. What can you find out about this third party? What's the standard? What are the chemicals that are okay? What chemicals are not okay? You know, how can you actually scrutinise this? And so there are a whole lot of questions here. Who are they? What's their motive? Who are they representing? So these are all questions. I'm not going to go through them one by one, but let's pick out a few. Does the third party publish a restricted substances list for this particular kind of product? If it's been checked against some sort of list, the consumer wants to know, what is that list? And if there's something on this list, or something that's not on this list, that I'm worried about, then at least I can know, and I can ask you why it's not on your list. Why don't you restrict this as part of your standard? Okay, well, we're going to provide this slide. There's a lot of text there, so we'll move on. We're going to provide this slide. There's some important questions there. So, we are now moving. We've now got a restricted substances list, and we're going to explain a little bit about why we think that's a good way to have transparency in what you're doing. You're providing the consumer with some information which they can weigh up for themselves. They can say, I agree with this list, or I don't agree with this list. So how can they back it up? Well, what is a restricted substances list? Let's explain that first in more detail. It's a promise from us, the company, to the consumer. Here is a list. This is a list that we use internally, and we say we're not going to use any of these chemicals. This is our promise from us to you that we're not going to use. You're not going to find these chemicals in our product, or you're only going to find them within very specific restrictions. Okay. And an ideal RSL, in our opinion, is one that is publicly available, that can be scrutinised, that people can decide whether they agree with it or not. And transparency in third-party standards is at least as important as it is in claims made directly by a company. And also it's independently audited. So how can an RSL be audited? Basically, what does independence mean? We want independent auditing, but what does it mean? Yeah? Again, it's another term that needs definition. What does it really mean? For us, personally, it means that it should be independent of the company or the industry, hopefully, because companies obviously represent themselves, industry associations often represent themselves, and they're not actually really representing the consumer. That's actually you guys and the NGOs mostly that do that. You guys, the journalists. And hopefully, ideally, the standard should be set by a party that doesn't have a profit motive, because that does a little bit, at least make you suspect what the motives are. We're open and clear about, we're a company, of course, and we do have a profit motive. But third-party standard to be rigorous, to be transparent. We use ISO 14001, and because it meets the criteria that we talked about. And all our manufacturing is based in the UK. So that automatically means that we're being audited. There's an independent third party that is making sure that we are sticking to the local legislation, which in our case is REACH, which amongst other things has a restricted substances list, which we have to be checked against. But it also allows us, it has a section in it which is about legal and other requirements, and it allows us to put our own assessment of the chemicals that we don't want to use, that we think are important to exclude. It allows us to put our own stuff in there and be checked against it. So that's good, in our opinion. And it also is quite a regular audit, so we have to do an internal audit every 6 months, and somebody comes in from the auditing agency, which in our case is the British Standards Institute, and they come and the external party does the audit. That's every year. But auditing can only really help you verify that a particular claim is true. But it doesn't necessarily tell you about the relevance, about the meaning, and the justification. So that is where it's really important that companies provide information, justification. So in summary, the strongest green claims are verifiable by the consumer and journalists. They're available for public scrutiny. They're defined in terms that you can go out and somehow check. Yeah? Independently audited by a trustworthy body, great. But also have the relevance explained to the consumer in a public forum. And this thing about public scrutiny, there is no substitute for that. There is no silver bullet which is going to clean up everyone's act necessarily. There are always going to be competing methodologies and systems. So public scrutiny is still important, and the way that we as companies can help that process happen is by providing as much information as possible. And we are working towards that now. So hopefully you'll get a chance to go on our website. This is a work in progress. We don't have all the answers, and we don't claim to. But this is saying about what we're going to do, and the approach that we're going to take. And hopefully you'll be able to access much more information from us than you ever have done before.